You've joined the Betamax Video Club, rewinding back to our favourite films of the 1980s. My name's Rich Nelson, and today I've rented The Fourth Protocol. Watching it with me is Jonathan Softcott from Shogun Films. Hi Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very excited about The Fourth Protocol, which is a real kind of teenage favourite of mine.
Oh yes. Thank you for bringing your Betamax copy of this film. What's so special about it for you?
Well, Michael Caine is my favourite actor, is the long and the short of it. And, everyone has their favourite Michael Caine movie. And I like all the ones that no one else does. So, sure, I like Alfie, it's terrific. I always found Zulu a bit of a slog, too many repeat viewings on a Sunday afternoon. And obviously Get Carter's fantastic. And, there's all these great movies. But for me, Caine, peak Caine is mid-80s Caine.
Yes.
The Caine of Jaws the Revenge, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Without a Clue, Jack the Ripper, Blame It on Rio, and of course The Fourth Protocol. And if you combine my great admiration for Caine with the fact that the James Bond movies of the 80s are my favourites, then Michael Caine in a spy movie opposite Pierce Brosnan is kind of about as good as life gets.
This really was a golden age, certainly if we're talking about being a movie podcast about the 1980s for Caine. And you forget that it was quite often parodied, Blame It on Rio, and I've talked about Surrender that he did with Steve Guttenberg and Sally Field before. But this was also one of his most successful periods, certainly in terms of awards. And in this, it really was a proper adaptation of a proper spy novel. And that, once, and as we talked about this before we started recording, if you strip away quite a lot of it, change maybe the Russians for something a little bit more contemporary, the plot could quite easily be transferred into the current day.
Yeah, it could. I mean, it's, the idea that someone is smuggling in a nuclear bomb piece by piece, undercover to essentially trigger, either unilateral disarmament or War 3 is fantastic. It's completely ripped off from Octopussy, which has exactly the same fundamental story in it.
Yes.
And that's brilliant because you can never have too much Octopussy. But it's a great kind of stripped back performance-driven thriller, and I think that's one of the things that I like about it. When you look at those 80s spy movies, they're so often sort of hampered by all the at the time high tech. I mean, that sort of digital watch briefcase in For Your Eyes Only that controls all the submarines. It has not aged so well, but the fact of the matter is we all still think about a nuclear bomb as looking rather like one of those fairground things where you have to get the stick through the wire. So seeing Pierce Brosnan build it out of what kind of looks like some gym weights and a rolling pin and a coffee cup is terrific, and that's exactly what I would expect the Russian next door to be doing.
And this was, of course, filmed in Milton Keynes, which was a hotbed of badness in the 80s, because this was about the time they filmed Superman 4. I mean, we're watching this, and I've talked an awful lot. Pierce Brosnan seems to come up on loads of these episodes, and this is the first time he's actually appeared on screen in one, and it's the first time I've done a film where Michael Caine is in front of the camera, if you take away the 1986 World Cup film he did, which I'm sure paid for a villa or at least a nice car for him. But
yeah,
but it's just so nice to sit down and watch. I read one of the reviews of this where it was basically saying this was peak Caine. It was that era where, he was a little bit older. This was, almost, it's not the same character. He's not Harry Palmer, but it's in the same sort of world as the Ipcress file, where he's a little bit older, a little bit more sort of wily and less bolshy in his way, but he's still almost playing the same character.
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, I'll be honest with you. This was always a more appealing film to me than the Harry Palmer films. As much as I love and appreciate them, and the Ipcress File in particular is a terrific movie. But I prefer kind of like older, authoritative, kick-ass Caine rather than I'm going to buck the system, young Caine. And he clearly had a real kind of fascination with the Palmer character, because he was always attracted to playing these kind of slightly underdog spies, not only obviously in this, but then he did the two Harry Allen Towers Palmer movies in the 90s, Bullet to Beijing and Mission to Moscow, or was that Police Academy? I can't remember.
That was Police Academy.
I think that was Police Academy, but they all kind of blend into one. And then he did a movie that I actually watched again recently called Blue Ice. Do you know that one?
Yes, I think I saw that at the time. I haven't seen it since.
Yeah, which is kind of like a really shit sequel to Fourth Protocol. and he's an ex-spy in it who owns a jazz club and drives a Jaguar, and has an affair with a much younger woman, and somehow gets tangled up with some sort of old school Thai type superiors pulling a scam. And that was clearly something he thought that he was that sort of anti Bond. But in the 80s and the early 90s, he was a more polished anti Bond, which I like. And I think in the Fourth Protocol, he really has that kind of alpha male thing down pat. And the appeal of Caine has always been that he is everyman. He's a bit heavy. He's a regular guy. You could see him going out shopping or down the pub. He talks like everyone else. He's not uber stylish, but he's always cool. And that for me is exemplified in Fourth Protocol, where he is basically playing Michael Caine if he were a spy, which of course is what all movie stars do.
And as you said about the style or the fashion, he certainly rocked the ski jacket over a leather blouse on look.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember reading something at the time that it was all a bit uncomfortable because they either shot it in the winter and then had to do the pickups in the summer, so he was sort of sweating horribly in his ski jacket, or they shot it in the summer and he was dressed inappropriately, something like that. But Caine always looks great on screen. He is for a man who is clearly not particularly into style or fashion. He's always a natural clothes horse. He always looked great. He always looks like a real sort of tough guy. Everything's minimalist, and he always looks like he's not trying too hard. And that's the Caine I like is when he's like that. I mean, he looks at his. I think he looks at his physical peak in that film as well.
Yeah, I think he's at that sort of age where he's probably able to use his physique slightly more. He's not just this live young thing, I suppose.
No, he's not. He looks like he's going to fuck Pierce Brosnan up, and he does. It's great, And when Pierce Brosnan gets the upper hand, he calls in the SAS. I mean, what more could you want?
I mean, speaking of Brosnan, I mean, this would have been the time, or this 87, when he should have been in The Living Daylights. And we talked about in that pod where he was virtually announced in the role and had to leave back to Remington Steele. But this was, he certainly looked the part.
Well, I'll tell you an anecdote about that, and obviously, I can only tell you what I was told. But I used to be friends with a publicist called Jerry Pam, a Brit in LA, who's sadly dead now. And his two biggest clients for many, many, many years were Michael Caine and Roger Moore. So he's fairly decent authority on the subject. And he told me, he represented Pierce Brosnan at the time, he told me that Pierce got as far as actually shooting the gun barrel for The Living Daylights.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, that must have been galling. And look, I love Dalton. Dalton is terrific in those two terrific movies, but unfortunately he was way ahead of his time. I also think Brosnan's timing was better in the 90s because he's always been a fantastic actor. He's brilliant in The Fourth Protocol. He's even fantastic in that tiny little part in The Longer Friday. He had such a strong look. But by the time GoldenEye rolled around, he looked more of a man.
Absolutely.
And I think unless The Living Daylights had been a real kind of Casino Royale style reboot going back to basics, which they would never have thought about doing back then, then it wouldn't have worked. And The Living Daylights is slightly hampered by the fact that it's very clearly a Roger Moore movie that they cut the jokes out of to accommodate Timothy Dalton.
Because I know on Thunderballs, Marty's website, where he actually has some photos of Pierce Brosnan filming some of his Living Daylight scenes, and then when you compare it to 8 years later when GoldenEye came out, and he just looks like he's matured into the role. Yeah, and even looking at him, he does. And looking at him here, where the scene where he is assembling the bomb with Joanna Cassidy, and he's obviously shirtless, but he looks, and I say it's a funny thing for me to say, but he looks quite skinny compared to how he does in the Bond films, where he does look that few years older and a few years probably more confident as well. Yeah,
I think so. And the thing is that he was in the 80s when he was doing Remington Steele. He was very good at that kind of, light, comedic, charming stuff. But I think the difference is in the 80s, if I were casting him, which is obviously something I do in my job, I would cast him as face in the A-Team. In the 90s, I would cast him as James Bond, and there is a real difference between those two things. And also in between those two things, he became a movie star. It's easy to forget because we all love Robin Williams so much, but the best thing in Mrs. Doubtfire is actually Pierce Brosnan. He is absolutely fantastic in that film. It's a really terrific, understated comedic performance.
In this, he again was kind of essentially playing two roles: the KGB major, the Academy star, becoming, I suppose, Mr. Joe Average, living in Milton Keynes, or in East Anglia, where this airbase was. There were a couple, and this film isn't a comedy, but there are some light parts in it, and there's a part of the scene where his American neighbours take him out, and
he beats them at bowling and everything. Yeah,
and there's a couple in there where he just kind of sits there thinking, someone without any timing could have played that incredibly straight, but I suppose it allowed him a little bit, whether it was even just the sly eyebrow or that sort of wry smile, where he's clearly a lonely man watching suburbia passing by.
Yeah, well, he's watching Big Daddy on the wrestling, isn't he? I mean, that's the thing, because it's like it's the 80s in East Anglia. What the hell else is there to do apart from trying to seduce your neighbour's wife? I mean, he couldn't go on Instagram and look at bombs or anything, could he? So he kind of has to make his own entertainment.
I mean, they just so happen that the major plot point of this is that he's a KGB agent recruited by the head of the KGB to basically detonate a nuclear bomb next to a US Air Force base in order to make it look like it was an accident. And this is something I had to look at, the whole what the fourth protocol is regarding the treaty that was signed in the 60s. And it's quite a strange one between the sort of big powers about nuclear weapons, in that if you're going to use a nuclear weapon, it's almost like do it like a man. Don't be sly and try and bring it in by covert means. It's kind of the only acceptable way of doing it is via plane or a missile.
Yeah.
It's an odd... I'm sure it made sense to them at the time, but hey-ho.
Well, it was obviously a popular plot, because, like I say, they stole it from Octopussy. So, there are obviously a lot of people thinking this is what the Russians are going to do. They're going to blow up an airbase and blame everyone else.
Yeah, it's a shame Brosnan didn't get a chance to dress up as a clown, but...
it's something that I think about often and regret deeply.
I love the fact that, again, another peak 80s film that I love. This film opens in Siberia, a bit like Rocky IV, although at least this was a bit closer. They filmed this in Finland rather than, I think it was Wyoming where they filmed Rocky IV.
Yeah, but Rocky IV is such a great movie. I mean, you talk about Christmas movies, that's got to be up there. I think not the best Rocky, but it's my favourite Rocky.
Yes, and again, they had the cars driving through the snow and the sort of huts and cabins.
Yeah, and it looks epic, and also I think we really do have to talk about the music in the Fourth Protocol, which is fantastic, and it's something I would actually love to have on CD. That score is so sort of evocative and adds so much production value to watching all of that. The snowy stuff and the Russia stuff. It's that really is amazing.
I take it it's not, because I mean it's Lalo Schifrin who did sort of Bullet and Mission Impossible theme, and this you kind of think something like that would be, and I guess this is the conversation we have unfortunately on a lot of these episodes where people are fond of the score of a film and they're so hard to get hold of.
They're a pain, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, often there'd be like a small independent company might get hold of it, but you think that music, and again, when I tweeted about the film the other day, that was one of the things that people seemed to love most about it was the score, and I suppose it's probably sitting in someone's vault somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Fourth Protocol's out on Blu-ray yet, is it? I've got it on DVD as part of a Michael Caine box set, but
okay, no,
sometimes that triggers. The Blu-ray makes people sort of pay attention again and put a CD out.
Yeah, because it is on iTunes. I recorded it off. It was on one of the sort of Sky channels, those random ones that seem to have that. But it's strange. Again, one of these sort of quirks of cinema where if it's a big film that goes, but every stone is unturned to drag something out that could be seen as content. But
I will look into it. Sometimes one of the things I do behind the scenes is sort of try and push old films out for release. I mean, I give myself a pat on the back for being the person that really forced The Man Who Haunted Himself out onto DVD, which I know is a film you saw recently.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is 20 years ago, but it was completely unknown then. I mean, people in this country knew it, but in America, no. And a friend of mine in the States had bought a big library from Studio Canal. And he was doing all the Hammer horror movies and all this kind of stuff, and the Sweeney. And I just said, listen, guys, you've got The Man Who Haunted Himself. This is a fucking brilliant film. And I know Roger Moore. I can get him to do the DVD commentary, which we did. And people came out, and suddenly everyone realised what an amazing movie it was. And that's another one that could really do with a soundtrack CD, I think.
Yeah, and again, you've gone to all that work, and it's almost a shame that this is the sort of the yin and the yang, I suppose, of satellite TV channels in the UK anyway, is that there are a couple of channels, and one in particular is Talking Pictures, that show these films quite regularly. And unfortunately, I say that it's a great film, The Man Who Haunted Himself, and yet we only see the film. We don't get to, as Joe Average, and I suppose this is what is the incentive to go out and actually buy the DVD, is to actually go and listen to the commentary.
Well, it is, and it's hard. I still like owning physical media, and obviously my business being a film producer, I want to support physical media, and it's a fallacy, certainly in the genres that I make films in, that the physical media is over. People do still buy DVDs in great numbers. The difficulty is if it's not chart stuff in the supermarkets, it's harder for people to get them, particularly with the sad closure of HMV. But I feel like I own a film when I buy a Blu-ray, and that's the same part of me that remembers ever so clearly when I was at secondary school, going into a flea market and buying the Fourth Protocol big box X-rental VHS.
Oh, classic. And again, they were just things where you remember, and even little things like if you found them now, there'd be the trailers at the beginning or the adverts or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and adjusting the fucking tracking. That was always a problem.
Yeah. Oh, memories. I should have actually digged this out. Maybe that should have been the podcast, actually watch the films on a video.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have to at least if I record them off the telly or, obviously a lot of them I do have on DVD or Blu-ray, but some of them I have recorded off telly or, iTunes or something like that, which isn't, I suppose, kind of sits in the middle. At least they don't necessarily drop off like they do on Netflix or Amazon.
No, that is a pain when they disappear. But that's why you have to support physical media, folks, because once you've got it forever.
Yeah, again, slightly off topic. One of you're behind some of the films that usually top the DVD or Blu-ray selling charts, don't they?
Yes, they from time to time. Yes, they do.
Yeah, and again, this is the thing where one of my sort of followers on Twitter shared quite recently. He found his old Betamax video recorder in, I think it was a parent's loft, and he had all these original Betamax home videos that had sort of pre-certified Star Wars, untampered. Yeah. And to think that the nostalgia it brings up, and the fact that hopefully the tape survived. I don't know if they did.
Yeah, I love all that. That's fantastic, and that's kind of what inspired me to do what I do, and sort of growing up in video shops, and we never used to go to the cinema really. I mean, we did from time to time, very special, exciting event movies like Jaws: The Revenge. My parents took me to see, but generally speaking, the cinema was a treat. Dolph Lundgren in Masters of the Universe, Transformers the movie. That was the kind of stuff I wanted to see then. But the video shop was very accessible. It's just around the corner. And that's kind of where my love of sort of cult and exploitation movies was fostered, really. And a massive part of that were tantalising boxes. I'm still devastated that Return of the Killer Tomatoes doesn't have a Rambo-esque guy with a giant tomato head in it. That's very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, my local video shop was where I discovered most of the sort of Jackie Chan Hong Kong films, and that was something my local video shop seemed to specialise in, was martial arts films, which, at the time being sort of early teens when I really got into that was great, and they were so cheap.
Yeah, well, they were big business, horror, martial arts, that slightly dubious erotic thriller. They were all real staples of the home entertainment business back then, and there were so many places to sell them. Every Spar shop had a video rack. And I remember when I first moved to London when I was about 20. There was this whole new world of every corner has a Spar shop on, and they all have these video racks. And so suddenly there was a whole new world of crap I'd never seen, like Nosferatu in Venice and all this kind of stuff. It was fantastic. And then obviously video went out and DVD came in, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, I'll say we're missing a bygone era. So.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
I mean, back to the Fourth Protocol, and having not seen this for ages, and you kind of forget some of the, as we touched on earlier, the lighter parts of the film. The introduction to Michael Caine, or John Preston, is he arrives. You can see him on CCTV looking incredibly drunk on his way to, again.
What a great scene that is! And Caine does drunk better than anyone, and that is one of his absolute best drunk Caine scenes. He's fantastic, and that scene's terrific. Start the new year off with a bang. It's brilliant, and I love the actor Anton Rogers who plays the unfortunate sort of putz in the whole thing. He and Caine obviously re-teamed years later in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, where he was the mischievous police inspector.
Yeah. But this was, some proper. I mean, it's hardly subtle. I guess it was partly intended to look like a burglary, but again, you're sort of blowing the safe with a bag of water, and the way he was cutting the cables. From the beginning that he's a professional, knows exactly what he's doing. But again, the whole concept, and maybe it's just me. I live in a fairly normal house. The concept of having top secret papers in your house, just in the safe behind the picture on the wall, is something I can only aspire to.
Yeah, I mean, I keep mine under the floorboards. It's much better.
I'll know that for next time. And then Caine gets told off by another 80s movie legend, Julian Glover.
I've been fortunate enough to work with Julian twice in a film called Airborne and in We Still Steal the Old Way. Obviously he is, like you say, one of the fantastic 80s villains, from The Empire Strikes Back through to Indiana Jones, For Your Eyes Only, and going 20 years back before that, Quatermass in the Pit.
And again, he portrays brilliantly this whole, and this is what plagues, I suppose, most of the public sector in the UK, or the civil service, the sort of aspirational do anything at all costs, and obviously ultimately this is what plays out throughout the film. But he is the acting head of MI5 at one point, and everything, as Michael Caine is quite keen to tell him acting
head sunshine. Yeah, exactly.
It's just even little touches like that, and I'm sure that goes throughout the theme of the stories and the novels, but just little touches like that just make it seem like, if you're watching it from almost that point of view, it just gives you that kind of reassurance that this could be very realistic.
It is my prerogative as head of this country's security service.
Acting head sunshine, and if you ask me, you're acting like a complete asshole.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the supporting cast is absolutely fantastic. I mean, Ned Beatty, Julian, obviously, Michael Goth, what a fantastic character actor he was, going all the way back to the Hammer films in the 50s. And obviously, he was the original movie Alfred in the Michael Keaton Batman films. Ray McNally, who worked with Caine again in the brilliant Jack the Ripper miniseries a couple of years after. Ian Richardson. I mean, it's literally like a who's who of fine British actors with tax bills to pay coming in and stopping some theatre and doing a movie.
It was a strong cast, and one thing I know, from the beginning, when you look at the CV of the director John Mackenzie, and of course the thing that stands out most is The Long Good Friday, like you already mentioned.
You bet, yeah.
Yeah, coming in with that sort of resume and that cast, it's I mean, I'm not saying these things put themselves together, but you can see that on the screen and in the story. It works so well.
Yeah, and I think, John Mackenzie is a seriously underrated director in my view. I mean, not only is The Long Good Friday the best British gangster movie of all time, bar none, I think it's also a perfect movie. For me, it's equally as good as any of the Godfathers, and it's a phenomenal piece of filmmaking, completely flawless. And that's why, to be honest with you, I've always been quite surprised Fourth Protocol is not particularly well known, because it's by the director of The Long Good Friday, for Christ's sake. I mean, that, Michael Caine and Pierce Brosnan, is enough to give it classic status for me. But I guess the spy genre, if it's not particularly glamorous, isn't overly popular.
And I guess this was one of the quotes that was attributed to Caine. I saw it on IMDb, where he was talking about this film and what he was looking to make as he, the executive producer or associate producer on the film, was trying to drive a more action-y spy movie that was akin to the 80s films that we talked about earlier, and yet he seemed disappointed that it turned out a slower pace and a lot more talking, which to me actually I probably found that more enjoyable. I think it worked better.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it more of a powerful film, because the problem is they clearly wouldn't have had the budget to compete with Bond. So it would have ended up looking like Death Wish 3 or something like that. And while I would love to see Caine blowing away muggers, we did in Harry Brown much later, but with a bazooka, this isn't that film. This is, to be honest with you, a more grown-up film. It's a quality piece of drama with some quality actors, and some genuine tension. And I think it's also worth saying that the leading lady, Joanna Cassidy, what a terrific actress she was. And it's only a small part, but it's a good part. And she'd been in Blade Runner, She went on to be in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. One of the great things when you're making a genre film of any kind, the thing that always lets you down, if it's going to let you down, is this bad supporting actors, because everyone remembers them. Everyone in this movie is terrific. There's not one bad turn by any of the cast.
No, and even the scene, quite early on when they're looking, they put the little putts, as you say, under surveillance, when he's trying to implement some tradecraft in making sure he's not followed. He's switching trains, he's going back on himself to get the pizza restaurant. It is in the grand scheme of things, it isn't CGI heavy, there's no stunts, but things like that add to the tension. You've got the cast.
Yeah, and it's really clever, because when it cuts back to them all being in the van, all the people he's walked past, it's like, oh wow, because you don't know who is a spy and who isn't a spy. That's a really, really, really nice scene, and I still want to have a pizza in that restaurant.
And again, things like that where he's dropping off presumably the documents that end up in the South African embassy, which then links to how he's turned and how he's outed as this. Well, he sort of defends it by saying he's fighting communism, and he's sort of turned into a supplier of misinformation.
No, and it's very prescient now for these times. I mean, as we now live in the age of fake news, it's kind of old school fake news in print rather than on the internet, which I think is very sort of forward thinking. Yeah,
and I think the fact that he's got an ideal, and it turns out that just because he's feeding stuff to fight communism, I mean, you'd like to think, but then that these people might have a little bit more of a bigger picture idea. But the fact that this information he's given, or he's at least told, is to a spy from the Russians, just to kind of give him that guilt trip to think, well, you think you're being idealistic, and you're actually supplying the enemy. Of course, this was the golden age of Russia being the enemy.
Absolutely, and all of those 80s movies with snow in them have Russian villains, don't they? I mean, even Rocky IV.
And at this point, we're finding out more about Pierce Brosnan's character, where he's being... I suppose this is another thing you see in films where he removes, or he's told to remove all the contact that he's had with anyone. So his contact in Russia/Finland is killed, as we see later on. And he is, as he calls Jim Ross, I think is the legend that he's given.
Yeah.
And just looking back now, I mean, we're 32 years later. The idea of seeing a youngish Pierce Brosnan driving an Escort XR3 with his sort of supermodel hair is just magnificent.
It is. Well, I mean, he was in The Professionals as well, wasn't he, Pierce? And it has that kind of vibe to it. And I think another film. One of the reasons I love this film is that it kind of seems to exist within an unofficial cinematic universe with Who Dares Wins as well. You can totally believe that when the SAS come in at the end, Lewis Collins was on holiday that day, because they all look very similar. And that's another one of my kind of favorite. I think The Fourth Protocol and Who Dares Wins are my two favourite Brit action movies of the 80s.
Yeah, they sit nicely together, and again, it's nice to think that it's quite easy, certainly with British films, and you think that they do occupy the same space where the actors and probably a lot of the crew sort of drift from one set to the other.
Yeah, well, they did. I mean, look, no one was making films then. People talk about a drought in film production now, but there was Goldcrest back then, and that was kind of that. That's why Caine was doing all those films in America and ultimately moved out there.
Yeah, I guess Caine in canon movies was a big thing at the time, but and people talk about that in a derogatory way, and I know there were some shady working practices that we talked upon on actually the Superman 3 episode, where the cast and crew would all often be working on 2 or 3 movies at the same time under the guise of one to get around sort of various labour laws and things like that. But I mean, as a consumer, I suppose it's not a bad place to be, but I guess under sort of current working standards, definitely frowned upon, at least.
Yeah, I all I can tell you is I never met Golan and Globus, but I have huge admiration for what they produced and the fact that they managed to be incredibly prolific. And obviously there are some tantalising gems amongst their output, which I love. The Ninja movies, the Death Wish movies, all those kind of things. That we always hear that they're sort of stereotypical film producers. They're not really, because they very clearly, just saw it as product and shipped it out. And I've certainly never come across anyone quite like that. But I have no doubt that if I had, I would have done business with them. Because I really admired their productivity, and I think everyone jumped on working with them because they got stuff done. The film industry is riddled; it always has been, always will be, with people who do a lot of talking and not a lot of doing. And they certainly did a lot of doing.
Would you ever consent to some sort of Electric Boogaloo style documentary of your sort of back catalogue?
Well, if I ever do anything worth making a documentary about, sure.
You'd have to get Superman 5 up and running. I think they did posters for that and traded those at Cannes at one point, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean that's how you used to do it then, was just those sort of pre-sales at Cannes, and it wasn't just them. I mean, Charles Band was doing some great posters for films that never got made, which have terrific artwork. I'm a big fan of those kind of Empire movies as well. I suppose to be honest with you, because I sort of was always intrigued by how these films are promoted, that's why I take such a personal interest in how my own films are marketed now.
But when things like, we talk about the Fourth Protocol 30 years later, where there's things that even something like the score, which seems as an end user to be almost another part of the product, when that sort of stuff gets lost, you think if you're going to spend any money on it, you might as well put it all out there and make it worthwhile.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think I don't mind the key art for the Fourth Protocol. The British key art, which is that sort of shuttered picture of Caine, but it doesn't really sing to you. I can see why it was quite a muted ad campaign and didn't really catch fire. And it's a shame, because it's a movie that's considerably better than its artwork or its reputation.
Well, it's difficult as well that one of the, and certainly when I recorded this off the telly, and it was off I think it was London Live channel over here, and the image they showed as the promo art was a picture of Brosnan in the KGB uniform, stood slightly behind Michael Caine.
Yeah, seen it. Yeah.
And I shared this on Twitter, and you kind of think, like, if you're fresh to this film, you hadn't seen it before, you think, oh wow, this should be great. Of course, it's a promo still, and bears no resemblance to anything that happened in the film. Not that anyone would hopefully rely on one photograph, but that would be quite disappointing if you think that Caine and Brosnan shared such a small amount of screen time and barely any dialogue other than a grunt or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not sleuth, is it? In that sense. But it's I think it's that sort of cat and mouse without ever meeting thing. It's a hard film to market though, because normally with a spy movie you just put the alpha male on the front and then lots of explosions behind him. But of course there aren't any explosions in the movie. On the other hand, just going back to that film Blue Ice, which is kind of a compatriot of the Fourth Protocol, I remember being incredibly disappointed after seeing the trailer that Bob Hoskins was only in the movie for about 90 seconds, because he's most of the trailer running around with a machine gun shooting at people, looking like it's this big explosive London action film, and then he's just doing corporate military training. So the art of the miscell is a peculiarly British thing, and it is something I've certainly suffered from. I made a comedy about the film industry called Just for the Record, which Danny Dyer played a sort of film producer with a moustache, sort of Clark Gable moustache, and they released it as a gangster movie with him on the front with a picture from another film saying, "Get in on the action, just try not to get cut." So I know how hard it is trying to strike the balance between actually selling stuff and then being truthful.
Yes, bloody hell! Imagine that.
Yeah, it was fairly soul destroying. You can imagine.
I can imagine. Well, how much work did you put into that?
Well, I mean, not much. The film was crap, so I suppose I deserved it, really. But
well, in this case, I mean, Michael Caine, having been told off for his chasing around of the surveillance and everything else, he's, I say, demoted. He's moved to another department where we get the. He's moved to airports and ports, or airports and bloody ports.
Yes, exactly.
And I guess for some, I mean, in my field of work, going to the airport is normally a lifestyle choice rather than a career aspiration. But this is kind of what gives him almost an inner into how the scheme is caught. And of course, spoiler alert, throughout the film, we find out towards the end that he's being fed this information.
Yeah.
But working in airports and bloody ports actually allows him access to this. He ends up finding that a Russian is struck by a truck in Glasgow in possession of polonium, and then that leads down the sort of rabbit trail of the atomic bomb and everything that goes along there. It's all very, I mean, there's circumstance, but there's also, the fact that he is doing spy/investigation work to actually get to the bottom of this plot, whereas his senior officer is more just determined on moulding the public sector in his image, and he's a yes man and we can't disappoint him, so we'll fuck you off instead.
Yeah, and I think that's the core of it, is that Caine as the sort of everyman hero is still bucking the authority, and obviously it's his instinct as a human being that wins out over the pen pushers, which is a fairly Frederick Forsyth theme, I think. It
works so well, and yet it just feels like from the beginning it's all a little bit nice that it falls into his lap, and of course that was kind of the whole point, which I guess it's that whole conspiracy theory thing where everything is done for a reason, even the overall plot that, had it failed, great. If it had gone ahead, obviously there would have been benefits to the Soviets anyway. But the fact that it's his compatriot, or his ally in MI5 is in on it as well. Sort of rewatching it again, you kind of just think, it's difficult to watch when you kind of think at the end they're all basically puppets on strings.
Exactly, and I think that kind of gives them a nice get out for the fact that otherwise it would all be a little uncredible. So I think that was a smart thing. I haven't read the book, so I don't know if that was in the book. I would imagine it was. I would imagine, like most of these things, the book would have had more rather than less sort of story. But yeah, I think it's a smart move. It's a very well constructed story. Yeah,
and even the parts where the elements of Pierce Brosnan sort of meeting contacts in order to exchange the bomb parts, because there's the scene where he's walked in the gents.
Yep.
And again, there's a slight sort of, I would say, missell there, but definitely his background of where he's this highly trained KGB soldier. We've already had an element of the plot where was it the man's son was implicated in some sort of gay photography in order to get him on side. So there's clearly that's already been established, that within the Soviet Union and the KGB, homosexuality is a bad thing, and yet we see shortly afterwards Pierce Brosnan decides to almost seduce this witness to his trading of the bomb part, and then cuts his throat in the front of a Ford Sierra.
Yeah, well, I think it's also it's sort of the by any means necessary thing, but then you also think is he just a bit of a wrong un, Pierce Brosnan, because he's he gets that guy, then he's got the American's wife, then he obviously shags the girl that brings him the part for the bomb. I mean, he's just a sort of ticking time bomb of testosterone, isn't he? And who can blame him, really? I suppose is the long and the short of it. I mean, I always thought that scene where the guy tries to pick him up in the bathroom at the airport was quite sort of modern, really. You wouldn't think twice about it now, but in the mid-'80s that was an unusual thing to see, and Brosnan was always very sort of relaxed with that. I think we are still talking about a time in the mid-'80s when a lot of actors would have said, I'm not going to play a homosexual, are you mad? Because they had all these crazy ideas about machismo and stuff, which thankfully have, well, hopefully all faded away now. And he was always pretty chilled and seemed very happy with who he was in his screen persona.
Yeah, and I guess, as you say, I don't think this part was particularly implicated, but it almost seemed like he was, because he was exposed to kind of that both sort of average Milton Keynes / East Anglia lifestyle and seeing what was going on through his neighbours' windows, and there was that exposure to various sexual practices that I don't know, they weren't implicated in what was shown in the Russia scenes. That perhaps he was a little bit exposed to this and kind of just thinking, okay, this world is different.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I think you're right. I think that's definitely it must have been a massive culture shock. It would be, wouldn't it, coming from Soviet Russia into good old Milton Keynes.
Yeah, and the fact that we see shortly afterwards when he goes onto the airbase with his neighbours, and there's the bowling alley in the American. I mean, I have been on one of these air bases through work, and one of them, was it Lakenheath? They had a Burger King where you pay in pounds and they give you a change in dollars.
Right.
And that was just such an alien concept. They did tell us that would happen, but sort of being there and everyone there had an American accent, and we actually went in a bowling alley, and I can't remember where Lakenheath was, but we're sitting there and just going, but having been in that environment, then seeing it here on the film, it's just, I can imagine why it would sort of both throw a lot of people, and probably if you're that way inclined in terms of, you know, small-mindedness or the inconvenience of it. Of course, it's in the news now for Air Force bases and diplomatic immunity and all that nonsense, but that's a very odd environment. It's almost like being on an embassy on foreign soil.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
And having, was it Matt Frewer, I think was the actor, he was in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I think I remember him from.
Yeah.
And his wife, I just wrote wife with eyebrows, who has a massive crush on him and grabs his thigh in the car.
Yeah. Yeah, well, who can blame her? I mean, he's an incredibly handsome man. You know, Russian sociopathic serial killer or not, he's, you know...
With a perfect British accent.
Exactly.
Yeah. One thing I did love, and obviously this can't have been deliberate, was the fact that when they were dancing in the bar to Stand By Your Man, which was what was playing in the bar in St. Petersburg when he went to
Goldeneye, right?
Goldeneye,
yeah, absolutely.
After strangling a cat by Minnie Driver.
Yes, quite.
Who's strangling the cat?
Strangling a cat. That is Irina, my mistress.
Pray tell her to go.
And then this is where he picks up the bomb assembler and they start putting the bomb parts together. Or so he's had the lesson anyway, and he's picking up the various parts where Caine's having the lesson, sorry. They're talking about picking up the very heavy ball, and it's he's always, you know, he's on a mission when he's in his black leathers on his BMW motorbike. Looking quite, a bit like Street Hawk or something like that.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, looking like he should have his own 80s TV show doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and even something where we see this. It's easy to look back on technology as dating a film, where Michael Caine spends all night. Because bear in mind, he's officially suspended from work, but he's spending all night looking through sort of border checks and flight manifests. He looks like he's been up all night playing, I don't know, one of Championship Manager on his laptop or something like that. But yes, an old computer.
Yeah, and his little boy comes and sits on his knee, and he says no one can pronounce all their names. Yeah,
he looks like he's playing a sort of football manager game with all these sort of Eastern European imports, trying to work out who to sign.
Yeah, no, it takes me back to the glory days of the Commodore 64.
Oh. In fact, I read, I think it was on IMDb, this was actually a game, or they made a game of this film.
Really?
Yeah.
That I don't remember. I can't imagine it would have been a particularly brilliant one, I have to say. But,
no, I remember the Death Wish 3 one, which was amusing, but there must be footage of it on YouTube or.
Well, you know, there was a flurry in the mid '80s of video games looking to license any kind of established sort of IP. So any film that came out, I mean, there was a View to a Kill computer game, all these things, but also some less obvious ones, such as indeed the Fourth Protocol. Yeah,
I mean, I remember having sort of RoboCop and Cobra.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd have never pinned this one as an essential on my Spectrum Plus 2.
No, I think we should push for the CD rather than the video game cassette.
But this one, so Pierce meets, I've put Zora because that was her character from Blade Runner, and again she said she's from Finland, so you know I didn't notice a Finnish accent. Those regular listeners might know my wife's from Finland, so we didn't pick up too much of that. He's clearly got the horn for her because she's a very attractive lady, and he's a very lonely man.
And he's been watching too much wrestling. Yep.
Too much Big Daddy.
Yeah.
It's a shame they didn't get the World of Sport theme in there somewhere.
That's probably more expensive.
Yeah. And they start assembling. I suppose this is the sort of home bomb maker's cookbook, really, isn't it? Where they're building this huge bomb on the table and aiming to kill up to 5,000 people.
Yeah. Exactly.
And all these very shiny cylindrical parts is all very and of course he's topless and they're drinking wine, so
of course
very middle class activity to do. Is this something you've had in any of your films, a sort of bomb making scene?
No, we can't afford bombs. We're low budget movies. We'd be more kind of whoopee cushions. No, I haven't. I would like to. I'd like to do a spy movie, to be honest. I'm always looking out for one. And if I could do something in this vein, then I would like that. I don't know how easy it would be to do it in the market at the minute, where everyone wants kind of massive action or serious drama, and it sort of sits in the middle. But I would love to do it. we've been developing a TV series, a spy series called Shady, written by the actor Nick Moran, and that's very kind of Harry Palmer-esque, and that's sort of going out or is in play with sort of Netflix and Amazon and those kind of people. It feels like it could be more of a TV thing than a movie thing these days, but it's certainly it's a space I'd like to be in for sure.
Yeah, and we missed out this part where they get information that the radio engineer is on the train, and I quite enjoyed the stunt where they drove into the station alongside the moving train.
I know, into Liverpool Street Station, which I've never known that to be a possible thing to do. I think it's Liverpool Street because it's a Colchester train, isn't it? So
yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, because I kind of thought, I think at Paddington, if you took out the rail barriers, you probably would be able to. But again, it'd just be done for fare evasion.
Well, exactly. But he does do it, and there's also a rather neat bit of trickery where he hops off the train on scene, isn't there?
Yeah, and I love it where he's just stood behind the train on the tracks as it pulls away.
Yeah, he just should have been smoking a really big cigar for that shot.
And this is, I suppose, where we move properly into East Anglia, where the Soviet engineer goes towards the biker cafe, and Caine is doing sort of some surveillance from a bed and breakfast opposite. Yes,
and they sort of show everyone out. And again, that's where it all starts to feel a bit like Who Dares Wins as well. That surveillance stuff reminds me of the bit where Rosalind Lloyd and her kid are trapped in the Muse house by Ingrid Pitt.
I sort of said, wonder if this would be on TripAdvisor somewhere. They'd maybe afterwards John Preston, a random number, would engineer on TripAdvisor saying, "Oh, it's very good. Good view of the cafe opposite for binoculars." And that's when they see Pierce Brosnan for the first time, turning up to. I think this is to send the message back to Moscow that everything's all sort of organised, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, what a pain in the arse it was in the 80s. You had to go all the way down there just to send a signal. Now you could just do it with a WhatsApp.
I know. And so he'd have to get on his bike and go down to the cafe. And this was something that they talked about. They were going to hit the cafe afterwards, and I guess whatever information or intelligence they got from there would be great. But the fact it was, you wouldn't suspect a biker cafe to be housing some sort of Soviet radio installation.
No, especially not in Colchester, I'll be honest with you. That's really not a hotbed of red activity as far as I'm aware from various trips there.
No, I've got a friend who grew up there. I might have to text him and find out if he was aware of any sort of shady-looking Russians at the time.
Yeah, but they had to, those 80 spies, they had to really work for it. Technology really has made their job a lot easier, hasn't it?
Having to actually physically go to somewhere to send a message, I suppose it's just a bigger scale version of going down to your local phone box to make a call.
Exactly that. It's an international red phone box.
At this point, Brosnan leaves on his bike, and Caine follows him in their transit van off to Ipswich. And they've managed to put a tracker on the bike so they can follow him.
Yeah.
He's doing it's quite impressive riding with the in the sort of country roads and all that.
Yeah, and then they hit the most British of all obstacles, the traffic jam.
Which has been sort of, the police have arrived on scene very quickly and with the signs and everything, but it's there's that little bit of tension where obviously Brosnan's stuck in traffic and Caine gets out, and it's just some ludicrous driving from the van driver, sort of barging the cars out in front and then going off road, pissing off the local walkers and probably doggers.
Although at least they didn't do the old trick of, he finds someone in a car who looks just like Pierce Brosnan from behind, but is actually a woman. That's the cliche I was kind of always expecting in that scene. But no, he just misses him by being sort of slightly incompetent and slow.
Yeah, but again, it was just that little bit of tension and Brosnan driving the XR3i it was nice to see, and of course he gets away initially anyway. But just some of the driving of that van. I mean, having driven Ford Transit, I guess it's a good advert for them being quite robust.
Yes, I think so. I think, I've often watched that film and thought I must get that van for the next time I decide to try and break out of a traffic jam.
And to the airbase, there's a large CND protest on the various interruption. I guess now you could probably change that to climate change or something like that.
Yeah, Extinction Rebellion. I guess that's exactly what it is. It can't be long before they turn up as the villain in the movie.
Yeah, it's just I'd imagine that Extinction Rebellion are probably a bit more disruptive rather than standing at a fence with candles and singing. But times have changed.
They have. Yes, I think you're right.
So Caine gets into the house opposite Brosnan's and doing surveillance from there, and kind of basically says that to the neighbours, "Oh, he murdered his wife and kids," and anything to get him out of the house. But they really do set up in this house with a commando team arrive.
They do, which is terrific. And then suddenly, when the SAS are there, it's all over.
It all gets serious, and even they're sitting there watching, and they're turning up in the NATO jumpers and everything. Like you say, they do look like they could be from Who Dares Wins.
Yeah, they totally do. Skellum was on holiday that day, so he sent his mate.
I do like the fact when they're sort of jumping around trying to put the listening devices on, and they just grab the kid, who's lost his cat.
Yeah. Well, it's great, and it's that's the thing. It is quite a realistic film, and it's very British, and all the traffic jam, the cat in the tree. I mean, every problem is like something straight off that Twitter account. Very British problems.
I wonder if maybe I didn't look and see sort of how this film did at box office, and I guess you could also look at what other films were released around the same time, but I don't know how well this would have translated into the US market. Bear in mind, it was sort of a bit Soviet, and it involved the Americans, but it was filmed almost entirely in the east of England. Yeah,
I don't know either, and it's very hard, to look at historical figures and put them in perspective. I can't imagine it did particularly well in America. I would have thought they would have seen it as more of a TV movie than a movie. Although Brosnan was a draw because he arguably more of a draw than Caine in the States. With Remington Steele. Caine was always sort of a supporting actor in big films in America. I remember the first time I went there, and I was trying to talk to someone about who Michael Caine was, and eventually we got to the fact, he's the Brit from Jaws 4, which I thought was a fairly damning indictment of his career, particularly given the way that film's followed him around with such a bad smell. But actually, for a long time, he was the Brit from Jaws 4 and The Muppet Christmas Carol. That's what happens when you make populist movies.
But if you're a budding actor and you're remembered for even those two roles, that's not a bad CV.
Absolutely not. I mean, it really isn't. Listen, any actor to be remembered, any actor to be working is fantastic. And, I always used to piss me off in the 80s, this real negativity about Caine, saying he does anything for money, he does this, he does that, he does the other. Well, you know what? He's the only one that had a film career.
And I guess...
and good for him, because, I know firsthand how hard it is for actors.
Yeah, and he looks like he's usually enjoying himself, which, it's easy to turn up and take the money and run, but, in this, there are large parts of it where he looks like he's enjoying it, and one of my favourite Caine movies, Escape to Victory. I mean, that's the dream, getting to play football with Bobby Moore and Pele and Sylvester Stallone.
I mean, how can it get any better? Oh, there's Rocky.
He's in here, bear in mind, he's an MI5 spy. The SAS lot have burst into the house, and yet he's the one hiding who gets that sort of very, by modern standards, very brief fight with Brosnan, where, again, it's quite brutal. There's headbutts and all sorts, which...
it is, but it's also very realistic. I mean, most real fights last less than a minute, and that's what I quite like about it. And the film throughout, when the violence comes, it doesn't come often, but it's quite full on. When Brosnan's taking care of people, when they have that scrap at the end, it's pretty good, and I like that about it. I think it's good. I mean, I know now if that film was made, they'd have a 10-minute CGI martial arts flipping sort of punch up that was sort of picking up radiation and beating her over the head with it. But I thought it was really good and gritty and well done, that fight.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're in a confined space on a hallway in a sort of Air Force Base style pop-up home. It's there's only so much you can do. This isn't Jason Bourne. Although I would love to see Michael Caine on wires or doing some sort of Krav Maga or something like that.
Yeah. I think that opportunity is probably passed us by now. Yes, no. I think he's not really a natural screen fighter, particularly Caine. But in this one, it seemed to be harnessed very well. It's convincingly done. I don't know who the fight director was, but I think they did a great job. And
again, this is the part where, as he's because Brosnan's reaching for the bomb, which is all ready to go. It's, the plot where he's only just found out because he assumed that the bomb had a 2-hour timer. The lady who he got his end away with changed it to 0. Then he killed her. Once he'd, done the deed.
Yep.
But yeah, he'd only just found out it was due to go. Obviously, was interrupted, and yeah, I mean that must be difficult. I suppose this probably when he realised he'd been set up, but it was still trying to set the bomb off, and Caine was stopping him from doing it. But he was prone. He was laid out on the floor when the SAS turned up and just riddled him with bullets, like under orders.
Yeah.
Say shoot to kill. But again, and I mentioned it on Twitter when Terry DeFellon, who's been on here before, we talked about how there was a lack of sort of screen time between Brosnan and Caine when, and I guess this isn't the story, and this could be deemed as fan fiction, as Terry said, where we could have had an interrogation between the two.
Yeah, that would have been a great scene, yeah.
Yeah, and even if Brosnan was a KGB, highly trained and everything, the fact that he knew at that point he'd been set up would have given it at least an angle where he may not have sat there in complete silence. Yeah, lost to the world, that one, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think the ending where Caine sort of finds out that it is all puppets on a string thing is a very satisfying ending. Obviously it's slightly downbeat, but then you think his kid's being snatched by the Russians and he's actually just mischievously playing away from the card. Don't do that, children. It scares us as parents. I think it's kind of the perfect ending, and it goes out with that big sort of reprise of the music, and it's over.
Yeah, I mean the way he comes across the two, sort of behind the scenes at the funeral, where he just outright says, and I guess this is his kind of independent renegade thing, where he says, I've got it here, you don't give a shit about anything except your lousy careers, neither of them. It's about time they put you in a fucking museum. Yeah. What a way to go.
Yeah. It's great. It's that last Michael Caine V sign to the establishment. I think it's a perfect ending to an espionage thriller.
But then that's again when the KGB guys says, do you think he'll talk? It's kind of like, that's just what he does. He's still, Queen and country and everything.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, it was just such a, as you say, downbeat in a way, but it tailed it off very nicely. Yeah, no, it did. And it's I think, thinking about it now, I think it is it's in my top 3 80s Caine movies. And say that's a lot to choose from as well. There is,
but I think that Without a Clue and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels are probably my 3 favourites, with honourable mentions to I hate to say it, but Jaws' Revenge, which I love. The Holcroft Covenant, which is fun and is kind of a stable mate for this. Blame It on Rio, Educating Rita. I must say I never much cared for The Whistleblower. Have you seen that one with Nigel Havers as his son?
I haven't seen it, no. So
no, it's a bit of a slog. It's kind of like the Coronation Street version of the Fourth Protocol.
Blimey, that's praise indeed.
Yes.
I will have to dig out, because obviously being a cult Steve Guttenberg fan, there was Surrender that he did, that was a canon movie. I think that came out in 87 as well. So
Yes. I haven't seen that for at least 25 years, so my memories of it are a little foggy, I'll be honest.
It is on YouTube.
Well, I can't endorse watch films on YouTube that shouldn't be there, so...
Yes. Anyway, moving on.
Yes.
So, Jonathan, that was the Fourth Protocol. Now we've touched upon throughout the podcast your work, sort of past and present, but Shogun Films has landed in January 2020. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect from that.
Well, Shogun is a new British film company with a new kind of way of approaching getting films made, which is a tough thing in this country at the minute. It's trying to embrace all the modern technology. We're going to be doing a Shogun Films podcast. We're going to have a very active YouTube channel, but also we're fundamentally about making good quality genre films with great actors that people will enjoy. And Canon is an inspiration, not the business practice, but definitely the model. Carol Co, all those things, and we've reflected that in our branding. So it's kind of modern and progressive, but also slightly retro, because I think as guys particularly, we all like these sort of 80s and 90s movies. And we start shooting our first Shogun film next month, which is a gangland home invasion movie called Nemesis, which is a terrific script, great concept, very nice cast coming together, which we'll be announcing imminently. So it's, I think if you like the kind of movies that I've been making, like Vendetta and We Still Kill the Old Way, then Shogun is definitely the home for you.
Well, all I know about Nemesis is the title, and that is enough to have me convinced. But
well, there you go. I mean, if that isn't a canon trick, then I don't know what it is.
It works on me. Unless it's Nemesis in Venice or something like that, then that could be the sequel.
Yes, it's Mission to Nemesis.
But yeah, so I mean, Shogun Films is going to be sort of active on social media, and in terms of the podcast, what sort of I know obviously people who listen to this listen to others. What sort of content are we going to have from the podcast?
Well, the idea is essentially to make a podcast about independent British movies, current, past, present. It'll be hosted by myself and my colleague Adam Stephen Kelly, who's a writer-director. And we'll have occasional guests on to talk about, new films, the state of the industry, what's happening. Because I don't see a resource out there for that. And I think, old movies are great. I love old movies, as you can probably tell from the last hour and a half. But I also think that we need to know about what's going on in the industry now and the truth of it, not the sugar-coated kind of BFI version of it. So that's our sort of mission statement for that.
Oh, well, I say it'll be interesting listening because, as you say, there's the version that gets put out by other people. There's the side that perhaps film companies or producers or that want you to see. But I guess having something, an alternative take, and well, say alternative in that it's probably it's going to be true. So
yeah,
that's rare enough anyway. So as we've talked about before, you're on social media. Your personal one is at Softcot on Twitter.
On Twitter, and at Jonathan Softcott on Instagram, yes.
Yeah, and so there's plenty of if anyone's into sort of dapper clothing and things like that, and some of the obviously you certainly have some fine dining experiences as well that us mere mortals can only envy.
Well, yeah, I think, to be honest, the only reason anyone looks at my Instagram is to see pictures of my wife. Is very beautiful, so I'm very happy with that.
Plenty on there, and get yourself over. Jonathan, thank you very much for coming along, and we'll make sure we rewind your copy of the film before we return it.
Yes, be kind, please rewind. And I think we managed to get through that without actually breaking the fourth protocol, which is good.
Yeah, I'd say that's we don't want to have to find out that we've been set up at the end of this.
Yeah.
Although, if someone says that we belong in a fucking museum, that's a compliment, I think.
Yes, I agree. I would take pride of place.
And as is tradition, the number one song when this film was released, and we're talking the 20th of March 1987 in the UK, was Everything I Own by Boy George. So, not quite the Fourth Protocol soundtrack, but...
No, not the banger I was hoping for, if I'm honest. But,
we've had better.
Yeah.
But, it sits there nicely. It's very much of its time. But...
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Lovely. Cheers.
Just to have you back again.
This episode was brought to you by executive producers Gary West, Fergus Higginson, Keith Foster, Jimmy Fletcher, Mark Drakes, Matt Cunnington, Christian Dees, Andy Elliott, Chris Hopkins, Omar Zambon, Laurie Curran and Ian Madrell, and associate producer Chris Oakley. Visit patreon.com/Betamax Video Club for more information about bonus episodes, early access and more. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review the podcast on iTunes.